All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the only coast to coast radio show all about the information economy. It's called Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, is here with a couple of experts in the world of security. I'm very pleased to have Isaac Roybal. He is the Chief Marketing Officer for a company called Seclore. That's Seclore. Safe and secure is our topic today. And we'll also be hearing from the IT Director of Infrastructure and Cybersecurity from Eugenus. We have Mr. Lucky Effendy on the line. So it's always nice to talk to customers. And I'll just say a few quick words to start us off here. Security is always important. It always has been important. I mean, dating back to the Middle Ages, you had castles to protect your precious items and your people. And we have, of course, great security mechanisms in the world of software and the internet. And there are many ways you can do that. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of security vendors out there, and they all have their unique little take on things. But typically, you've talked about in this industry the firewall. So the perimeter will keep people out of the perimeter. And I recently went to the Splunk conference and got to see just how complex that world is. And it is complex with all the bots coming in and all kinds of attack vectors. I've got a tiny website, InsideAnalysis.com. I get messages almost every day of someone trying to hack into the site from WordFence. It's an ongoing process, and it always will be. That's the thing about security. It's not a one-tool fix. It's not a once and done. It's an ongoing process, and the bad guys get pretty crafty at this stuff. And my business partner taught me years ago that there's a whole industry out there, and in many ways, the media portrayal of security troublemakers is very misleading. They always show the hacker who's like the lone wolf and he's got his hoodie on, he's hacking away. That's just one person. There's a whole industry out there with specialization. So there are people who specialize on penetrating, there's people who specialize on monetizing, there are people who specialize on facilitating the whole process, and they sell access. So they get into your site, then they sell that access to someone else who might sell it to someone else. And there's lots of money to be made. We're talking trillions of dollars a year now are on the black market for identity theft. I remember the big scandal here in the United States when they took down that whole railway line on the Eastern Seaboard, which was one of the biggest hacks ever. They didn't have gas all on the Eastern Seaboard for days because of a hack. So this is very serious stuff. And now with Gen AI in particular, Colonial Pipeline, that's what it was. I was upset I was forgetting the name. The Colonial Pipeline hack. It was a big, big deal. But now, of course, with Gen AI, we have these amazing AI engines. Companies want to be able to leverage their data, but they want to do so with governed data, with secure data, and with only the appropriate data. So we've got, of course, PII, personally identifiable information. We have IP, intellectual property. We need to protect these things, protect this data, and it has to be beyond just the firewall approach. So the folks at Seclore know all about that. In fact, they talk about the fourth wave of security, which I think is really fascinating. That's what we'll talk about today. So with that, let's bring in Isaac Roybal from Seclore. Tell us about the fourth wave. So you got the first wave is the perimeter, second wave is the device, third wave is the identity, and then what's this fourth wave you talk about?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for having me, Eric. When you think about this fourth wave, and it's really grown, I think, over the last 20 or 30 years within cybersecurity. When I started in the industry back in about 96 timeframe, it was kind of a simple approach, right? You just had the device itself, and that's where you were kind of generating some value, creating data, right? That was the initial kind of a data economy. And it was easy to protect it because it was just the device, and the only way you could get kind of malice software on there was through the good old sneaker net and the floppy disks that you would pop in there,
Right,
right?
right.
So we had the antiviruses that popped out there and trying to protect that device. And then, of course, networking technology advanced as well. And then we had the advent of the internet and connecting all these devices. Well, now it's how do we protect our perimeter? How do we protect our intranet from the internet from that perspective? And then the perimeter built out of that. Well, then as, of course, the internet blew up and we had all these microservices that started to pop around everywhere. So we were
Right.
starting to think about, well, I could go and log on to this service and that service and that service and use them in different ways. Well, then how do we protect the identity or confirm the identity of these people going around? So we went from device to perimeter to identity. But it's kind of been ironic, I think, in a sense that over this evolution of cybersecurity over the last 20 or 30 years, If you go back, the device was to create, an individual was going to create some sort of value based off of data. And we kind of forgot about the data and all of that.
Yeah.
We just said, hey, let's just keep throwing the data in a vault, and then let's make a bigger vault with more walls, thicker walls, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where we really think about this fourth wave that's happening right now. It's really around the data itself. And we think about it as called data-centric security, or really data that carries its own protection wherever it goes, whether it's inside of your environment or not. So if I send a
Mhm.
file to you outside of my network, I can maintain the same security controls that I would expect inside of my environment, and it carries around no matter if it's on your laptop, your cell phone, in a cloud storage bin somewhere, wherever it might go. I can maintain that overall. So it's really bringing kind of the two most critical aspects of security together, which is the person creating the data and then the data itself. Because the more you share data and more people collaborate on that piece of data, the value goes up on it, right? Because more, whether it's intellectual property or more knowledge, it's more value that's being created. Well, of course, that creates a new dilemma. That means the value of that data also goes up, which means the security risk also goes up. So how do you balance those two things where you can still use the data and maintain a high utility value of it, but also maintain a high protection posture on that data? And that's really where
Mhm.
data-centric security comes into play there.
Yeah, and you make an excellent point about collaboration and the fact that collaboration brings positive results. I mean, you must collaborate within a business and with your partners, so you must have some mechanism for doing that. And opening the floodgates obviously is not the answer for that. And a lot of folks in the enterprise, understandably, they hear security, they hear governance, and they go, "Oh no, you're going to make it harder for me to get to my data." Well, you want to make it easy for the right people to get to the data, but very, very hard for the wrong people to get to the data. And so your approach, and correct me if I'm wrong, as I recall, you will have your customers store data in a particular kind of folder. And then almost like a parent-child relationship, any data in that folder carries with it the permissions allocated to that folder. And it's a fairly sophisticated layer of metadata that allows for the sharing at some scale, meaning someone of a certain role in an organization, like from LDAP, for example, you can borrow those permission arrays, can then share it with someone of an appropriate level, right? So it's a rather fine-grained and malleable solution you have that allows for very careful stewardship of sensitive files, right, Isaac?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, Eric. And I would say there's an additional layer that we also have what's called manual protection methods. So what you just described was more of the automated method, which of course, when you're talking about massive amounts of files, specifically that you have deemed that are being created, say, by an engineering team. Let's just use that example, right? They're creating a lot of IP. You can drop all these files into this, what we call the hot folder overall, and anything that goes in there automatically gets a policy, a predefined policy of whatever you choose on there. And that is a level of permission and access, et cetera. So if it ever comes out of that folder, it is automatically seclored, as we like to say. It's kind of a
Yeah.
verb here, right?
Yeah.
That we can automatically seclore that file and maintain those protections that you would expect off of that, whether it's sent internally or externally. The
Right.
manual protection method, on the other hand, that's for kind of loose leaf files, for a lack of a better term here. Say I want to send over some sort of sensitive document to, you and Lucky and myself, and we're going to collaborate on this document. Well, maybe there's another document that I also need to share that maybe it's only privy to you, Eric, and then Lucky is privy to the other document. Well, what I could do is attach all three documents onto an email. I can secure the email so only the three of us can see that. Then I can put granular permissions on each one of the files in its
Wow.
unique context. So if the three of us can look at one file, we can see it. Then Lucky can only see the file that he's privy to, and vice versa for you as well. And so I can send that and I can do that just right in my Outlook client as an example. I can pop those in. I can say you get this permission, et cetera, and then throw it out. So and send it out, I should say. So I can maintain that granular level of control and access overall. Now, that's just the access portion of it. Now, once you open up the file, once you open up the secured file, then we can actually give you more of a granular access control on that, to say you can only read and write. You cannot copy or paste. You cannot print it. And we also have dynamic watermarking on those as well. If somebody pulls out
Interesting.
a phone and takes a picture of it and puts it on Twitter, we know exactly who the last person that had access to that file
No,
and who
wow,
opened it
that's
up.
cool.
Yeah,
That's cool. Watermarks are amazing things. And let's bring in Lucky Effendi from Eugenus. And Lucky, I mean, you have a very serious job on your hand. You're in the specialized manufacturing industry, right, for semiconductors. So there are obviously all sorts of folks who want to get access to your designs, to your information, to your personnel. I'm sure that's what drove you to get very serious about data security. Can you talk about how you're using Seclore and what you find compelling about it?
Sure. Before I talk about exactly how we found Secure, like any other company, Eugenus was basically wanting to do a secure infrastructure as best as security, right? With any other company, we did a strategy first by identifying really what is actually important to us, the information assets, and we figure out basically we've got the PLM, we've got the ERP system, and the files like in other businesses. But that files exist in file servers as well as the cloud system, which is Office 365. We need to secure it like any other company, how it travels out to the end user. So then I went off on a search and found a number of different companies and found that basically there's a lot of companies out there that could actually secure the recipient, but none that can actually recall it reliably. And the other thing as well back then was the cloud systems, Office 365. There was nobody out there, including Secure back then, but Secure listened to us and then created a product. And it has been
Hmm.
a very beneficial relationship
Wow.
so far that basically secure data in Office 365.
Yeah.
So
That's
that's how we came
impressive.
about Secure. Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, because you have to protect it wherever it goes. I mean, I love that you've got this layer of protection around the files, and it also, like Isaac suggested, will alert people, hey, this file showed up here, this file showed up there. In the security world, identifying signal is half the battle, then remediating is the other half. But if you don't identify the signal, if you don't know that something bad has happened, you're just a sitting duck, right?
that's absolutely correct. Yes,
Yeah. So you said that Seclure actually designed this product to your specific needs. And as I suggested, if you're in the semiconductor manufacturing business, that is extremely important information. You do not want your competitors to get it. You don't want bad actors to get it. And they're trying to get it. I mean, everyone is trying to penetrate this market. So you want the absolute utmost security possible. And that's what you found with Seclure, right?
that's absolutely correct. And the other thing as well that we found, that's basically the external threats, right? But also what we found as we developed this relationship, and Secure has addressed this as well, is that when we deal with so-called trusted internal users, right, and that could extend to the vendors. So for example, when I share a file to the vendors and they have access to it, right? And they have a contract to fulfill that the data should be in the US, right? Do they actually kept it in the US, right? And with Secure, you could actually say, you know what, vendor A, you said that you're doing this work yourself, but I'm seeing my file travels all the way to China, not just to one company, right, but to this other company as well, right? And that is in violation of the contract. So let's have a quick chat.
Wow. That
And
would
that's
not
what
be a
Secure
fun
has been able
chat.
to address. Yeah, that's supply chain risk, so to speak. Yeah.
That's absolutely fascinating. So, I mean, the fact that you can see it moving around, I would imagine that you will inform your vendors, hey, by the way, we have this security in place, so we're going to know. And what's the old expression? When you know better, you do better. And when people know they're being monitored, they're going to be extra special careful, right? Right, Lucky?
Absolutely. And from a business perspective as well, this is very important, right? When you are trying to ensure the quality of what the vendor is trying to deliver, they say, oh, we manufacture in the US. But do you really manufacture in the US, right? Do you really do all of the work in the US? Because that's important to a lot of companies as well.
Yeah, well, I can imagine, and to have that visibility is truly priceless. And you can also then negotiate better terms and enforce better
Absolutely.
protocols. I mean, that's what it really boils down to. It's like you don't ever want these files to go to the wrong place, but if they do go to the wrong place, that's when you have to have that quick chat, right, Lucky?
That's right.
Yeah, wow. Isaac, I'll throw it back over to you. We've got a few minutes left in this segments. I think it's very interesting that you created a bespoke solution for a very specific need because you realize that the intensity level here is the absolute highest. I mean, it's not nuclear weapons. I guess that would be the highest, but it's pretty darn close to that in terms of the chips because the chips allow you to make all these amazing things, and they're at the center of the whole conversation around AI, right, Isaac?
Yeah, it's kind of like the what is that? The Frank Sinatra, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. That's kind of how this is. And if we could design something to help these extremely complex supply chains in semiconductor manufacturing, we could help almost anyone. And what's interesting about this, Lucky, and you also mentioned this a little bit, Eric, a moment ago, is around, hey, not only the visibility, but the remediation of what's happening, right? There's a lot of folks that'll tell you, oh yeah, hey, we know what's going on. Great, I want to take action. What do I do? Well, you got to go try this other tool or something like this. Well, with these pieces of data that are flying everywhere, if you start to see some anomalous behavior, even down to the fact of somebody's trying to print this document, right? Remember, you can revoke print access and some of these other things.
Right.
If you can start to see those things, you can revoke access to everyone's access to the file. So you can basically
Oh,
dehydrate the file and it's just a
wow.
dead piece of bits, right? So you can say, hey, what's going on here? You can investigate and say, hey, sorry, I hit the print button by accident. It was an honest mistake. And then you can go rehydrate that file and it's ready to go. And, no matter where it's at. So that's really an interesting aspect to go back to these supply chains because they are, I mean, you're talking about multi layers of suppliers, right? Not just primary, secondary, but tertiary, even sometimes even more than that. And the other angle that I'll kind of end with here is talking about the compliance angle, right? So, hey, you can prove that this is in the US or not, as Lucky was just mentioning. So it's almost like you can take a security driven approach to compliance, or you can take a compliance driven approach to security. And there's that
Wow.
old saying in the industry that says you can be secure and not compliant, and you can be compliant and not secure. Well, we're
Right.
really finding that balance point there where you can say, hey, if you secure it, you automatically get some compliance capabilities right out of that.
That is very, very interesting because I often put myself in the shoes of the auditors and think about what life must be like for them. And it's a very complex job. You go into some of these companies and the information system landscape is incredibly diverse. It's incredibly complex. How do you know you're in the production system, for example? How do you know there aren't shadow systems running around somewhere? It's very difficult to do. So if you can walk in as an auditor and have someone say, hey, we've got Seclore set up to handle all this, that's got to be a big weight off their shoulders. Like, okay, we're at least getting somewhere. Well, folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis. What a fascinating show. We're talking all about security and data-oriented security. So not just the perimeter, not just the ID, not just the device, because there are endpoints. You talk a lot about endpoint security in this world, iPads, cell phones, laptops, desktops. Those are all endpoints where you need to focus your energy on making sure that you get your password to log in, et cetera, et cetera. And let's be honest, password management is a pain. And a lot of times we'll wind up marshaling all that into some tool, into like Google, for example. There are a whole bunch of tools over the years that have come around, but then if someone hacks that, they've got all your passwords. So it's like the key fob reality I figured out years ago. It's like, yeah, I can now unlock my car from a distance, but if someone steals my key fob, so can they. Right? So it's like the weapon the instrument you use to protect yourself can be used against you. And Lucky was kind of talking about that in the first segment with internal threats, people who you think are good actors who might do something bad. And the cool thing with this approach, and I'll throw it back over to Isaac from Seclore here, is you are focused on the data itself, on the files themselves, on where they go, which systems they get access to, where they show up in this country and other countries, and obviously with GDPR, there are some very serious constraints around where data is to be processed and leveraged. You want to know where that stuff is. So this is a big deal. And I'll throw it over to Isaac, in this auditor's story. Like I say, I think all the time about the challenge of being an auditor because, number one, it's not really a fun job. You're not the person that's welcomed with open arms and, taken out to dinner that night. You're like, okay, the auditor's here. But you've got an interesting story about a bank in India, I believe. What happened there?
Yeah, yeah. We recently had a bank in India that was using Seclore, and they had to pass a compliance audit. And so they came in, and when they started to see the results, the auditors started seeing the results of what Seclore was able to provide to give them all the information about the data origin, where it's been, how it's been used. They started to mandate that the bank use Seclore throughout the rest of their bank. So, I mean, talk about the best sales story for, for a product ever.
That's
That
great.
is one of those things kind of going back to that, hey, if you start with the security, and then you can have all of the audit logs that come with that, and it helps you pass an audit on the individual file. Whereas a perimeter-based approach, you end
Wow.
up saying, hey, I can see the access logs of who got into the vault, but what were they doing inside of the vault, and where was that data going?
Right.
To continue that analogy, using data-centric security, not only can you see who walked in the vault, but you can see exactly what they did with each individual bill of money within there and how they try to manipulate that. And that's where
Wow.
I think you add those two together. And by the way, we're not advocating that you throw the baby out with the bathwater here and just kind of say, hey, we're only going to go with this. But taking those four waves of security all together, you truly get this holistic picture, to be able to create the best offensive posture, I think, for data security.
Right. A good defense is the best offense, right? And a
That's
good
right.
offense is the best defense. Both. Lucky, I'll throw it over to you. We talked about this, and I've learned this over many years that security is not just one thing. In fact, there was an Indian gentleman who gave one of the best presentations I've ever heard. He said he got around to saying a bunch of different things, and he goes, "So basically, what I'm trying to say is lunch is not a food." And his point was that lunch is an event at which you can have any number of kinds of food. But in that same sense, security is not one thing. It's not just a technology for sure. It's not just a protocol. It's process, it's awareness, it's training, it's an ongoing reality. And people still fall for phishing scams. I mean, so some of those guys are getting really good. I almost fell for one a couple of years ago because it came through and it looked so legit. It was like from Verizon ostensibly, and my cell phone bill was like $1,048, which of course would make you go, what? And I was like, wait a second. Like, this is not, I looked more carefully. Oh, yeah, it's a phishing attempt. But my point to you would be that from your perspective, you want to make it as easy as possible for your team to do the right thing, right? You don't want it to be complicated. You want to have a fairly straightforward approach. Yes, you change your passwords. Yes, you always be vigilant, all these kinds of things, but you don't want to have it be complex. And so if there's one main solution you can use to focus on the data, that's really going to enable you to start sharing a lot more. And as Isaac was saying in the opening segment, sharing is crucial. You need to be able to share your plans with your partners to get the right fab, to get the right parts, to get the right services. So that if you get that in place, you really grease the tracks to innovation, right, Lucky?
Absolutely. And I think you touched on a number of different points there. That's really, really important, right? So for us, security has to be seamless in a way that people just don't know that security exists, but it does exist, right? So when they actually send, for us, when we send any attachments out, right, to people that's never been vetted, right? So it's always been secure, no matter who you are within the company, whether that's a CEO or a shipping guy that sends an email out, it's always going to be secure, right? And we have full visibility. So as soon as that email gets sent out and it's shared and it's something that the people are trying to do, IT has full visibility, right? So we're not preventing people from doing what they need to do, but we have eyes everywhere to be able to do what we need to do to secure the company.
Right. Well, and you're also delivering on one of the most important aspects of security with assets, and that's chain of custody, right, Lucky? So you know where the file came from, you know who had it at what point, and you can follow that lineage all the way across. And that's how you know that it's safe because it did not show up in China or in Belgium or some other place. I mean, I see when I get these hackers trying to come into our site, sometimes they're in Atlanta, sometimes they're in Bangalore, sometimes they're in Singapore. And maybe that's just a proxy. You don't even know. But if you have this wrapper around the file that is maintaining this security and sends the callback, then it doesn't matter where, it actually kind of reminded me when you were talking of, I heard a story about recycling and how some folks put little IoT tags, little RFID tags in products that they recycled just to see where they went, right? Because they said,
Mm.
oh, it's supposed to be going over here. And instead, it goes all the way across the ocean. It's in the Philippines. Now it's over here. It's like, oh, what's it doing over there? That's when you have that quick chat with someone, right, Lucky?
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's funny as well with using the example, right? So Isaac spoke about the compliance, right? So for us, when we were doing ISO 27001, for the very first time, right? And it's funny because I sent the documents that the auditor was requesting, and obviously the auditor is an external person and was Seclore, right? So he had to go through the steps to get him authenticated, right? And then open the file, and immediately he was impressed. I said, well, "What is this? I've never seen this before, right?" And I said, "Well, that's our rights management, right?" So that he understands. I mean, it's not really just rights management; it's more than that, right? But to get into his language, we said that's our digital rights management piece, right? And he said, "Oh, because of that, he immediately checked a number of different boxes. I don't need to double check, some of the stuff that I need to actually check to ensure that you meet the certain compliance for ISO 27001 because you've proven it."
Right.
And the other thing as well, it's quite funny because he worked for a certain company, right, as an auditor, but he also has his own company. Then he forwarded the email, and guess what? I found out as well. So he's actually moving the data across because I get notification, right? And I say, "Oh, you're trying to actually move it to that mailbox, right?" And I say, "Oh, don't I get immediate access because I'm the same person?" "No, because we need to vet you again because you could be a different person."
Oh, right. Interesting. You know,
And
this
again, he
this
was very, very impressed. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll throw this back over to Isaac. You know, I've always believed that security and governance, especially, are two of the same. They're peas in a pod, basically, right? Because governance refers to who should get access, security refers to who should get access. Usually, these are different teams, different groups, and then you get compliance as a different group, you get risk as a different group, and at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, why are these all different groups? I mean, you're doing the same thing, and I think it's because we just didn't have the technology or the wherewithal or the capacity to really solve for some of these challenges. But now we're getting there. And I think that's also very positive because again, if you have four different people who have to check off on something, there's a lot of gray area between what I think I said and what you think I said, and that just causes all kind of trouble. So if you can solve for the risk component, the security component, the governance component, and that governance gets down to usage. How are you actually using this file? You checked off a lot of boxes, just like Lucky said, right?
Yeah, well said, Eric. It's funny, even internally, we discuss like how we think about the product and the development roadmap. And really, when you kind of break it down, there's kind of four key elements to our product overall. And we think about the development and even the go-to-market angle. And one is there's definitely the security angle of that, right? How do we keep these files secure and keep them out of the hands of the bad guy? Second one is kind of the risk management components of that, right? Because essentially, it doesn't matter if you're an IP officer, an HR officer, or a head of IT, CISO, whatever it might be, you're trying to mitigate risk or reduce risk as much as possible. For
Mhm.
example, in an HR scenario, maybe somebody's sending out offer letters, but they don't want those offer letters to go to a competitor. So they're starting to see, how they're
Oh,
matching that. Well, you can secure those files, and they're only access to those specific people, and they're minimizing risk, right?
right.
On that side. So then there's the risk management piece of that. And then there's an IT component to kind of what we do, of course, because we have the infrastructure that supports that. We got to be able to deploy it seamlessly and get it up easily and running. And then the last one, and we've kind of talked about this, where Lucky, I think, said it best, where it's kind of like, hey, the security, you can't see it, but you know it's there. There's kind of a
Mhm.
consumer angle to that because at the end of the day, we're dealing with end users. We're not dealing with just back-end IT folks who are just using a back-end tool to go protect something like an agent running on a machine. There's actual workflow implications here. So making sure that we provide a user-friendly type of approach here where, again, the end user kind of thinks of something as simple as a iPhone UI, like that's kind of the expectation it should be. So how do we actually remove the friction from that point? Because at the end of it, if you don't, that is the last mile of security. If you don't provide a great user experience, the user at the end of the day, they're going to say, I'm not here to provide security to the environment. I'm here to do my job, and I will go around it if I have to in order to achieve that job. So it's
Mm.
not that the end users are, not educated or not willing to participate. They're just saying, hey, that's not my core job. That's not what I get, paid to do. So they'll find ways around it. So trying to make that as seamless as possible is super important. And then if that they end up going around the security, then it just kind of everything else falls apart. So
Right.
that's how we've been really thinking about it. So no matter which lens you look at it from, whatever your role might be, whether IT, security, compliance, governance, you're trying to mitigate risk or minimize that risk, you can use it with just one platform and using this data-centric security approach to it as well and adding it onto your security posture.
Yeah, I really like that. And because I've always had this theory that when rules are too constrained or too restrictive or too unreasonable, people go around them. Right. I refer to that as the black market effect. If you try to control something too unreasonably, people are going to go around it. They do it all the time. They find ways to get around it. So if you have it where it's reasonable to follow rules, most people, certainly almost all professionals, are reasonable people. They accept a contract to do some work for someone. I mean, there are a few bad actors, but most, like 99% of people, I think, are just trying to do a good job. So if the rules and the processes are reasonable and they know the security is there, I'll throw this back over to you, Lucky. It's great because now they don't have this added concern, right? If you're worried about being hacked and that prevents you from sharing crucial information, that's a loss. That's a net loss to the business because now that information was not shared. So if they know and they have the confidence to share and to collaborate, that's a big boon for the business, especially in something like high-end manufacturing, where you need to be sharing very precise, very special information with a bunch of different partners, right, Lucky?
Yeah, absolutely. And you be able to have that trust between the company and the vendor, right? And the other thing as well, with regards to the product, that we have a side benefit that in our experience, right? So in the first few months when we deployed this, it used to be when users come to me and say, look, I accidentally sent an email to somebody, but can we recall it? And the answer should always be, I'm sorry, it's a different mail system. We can send the recall message, but it's just another
Right.
email telling them, hey,
Right.
send it back. It just doesn't work, right? And we don't know whether that has been open or not. That's most important, right? So when we have Seclore and somebody comes to me and we said, you know what? Yes, absolutely. So we basically went to the console and said, yep, the user has received it, but it hasn't been opened. So we'll just expire the access. No damage done.
Interesting. Yeah, you're giving another deeper layer of capability for protecting the information. And that's extremely valuable because to your point, and I'll throw it back over to Isaac, sometimes people make mistakes. I mean, think about when you email something and it autofills people for you and you hit the enter key one time too many. It's, oh, whoa, that just went to my friend who works at our competition. Wait, pull the string on that puppy. So now we're just about a minute left in this segment, Isaac. Now you would have the capacity to say, hey, wait, I accidentally did this. Can you pull the string on that? Someone goes into the console and dehydrates the file. Is that right, Isaac?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We often at Seclore call this the kind of OS moments, right? When it's like, oh no, what did I do?
Right.
Lucky, on the other hand, coincidentally, him and I did a panel together about a year ago at a trade show, and he calls it preventing the oopsies, which I think is a much more kid-friendly version of that. But it's definitely the case, right? Where we've all done that, and you get that shot of adrenaline down your spine. Where you're like, did I just send that to the wrong person? And how can I make sure, especially if it's like password, file dot XLS, and you just
Oh,
happen to send it to the wrong folks. So
oh,
that is definitely a byproduct that I think a lot of our customers have been using Seclore for, as well as kind of for those oopsie moments and saying, how do I claw that back? I didn't mean to send that email. Because a
right.
lot of leaks, I mean, they can happen unintentionally, right? You think about insider threat, and I think people think about kind of the nefarious, kind of disgruntled employee who's going to go and steal data. And 99% of the time, it's somebody who autofilled and accidentally
Just
sent
made
it
an
to the wrong
accident.
person. Yeah.
Yeah. Accidents happen. Oopsie moments. Well, folks, don't touch that. We'll be right back. Safe and secure. We're talking on Inside Analysis. We'll be right back. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, a fantastic show. We're getting into the weeds of securing the data itself, not just the perimeter, not just the device, not just around the identity, but no, the data itself. And let's face it, there's some incredibly valuable data these days about your plans, about schematics, about any number of things that you do not want the wrong people to get. So, how do you do that? Well, there are lots of different ways to do it. And Isaac has a great concept where he talks about shifting the economic burden against the attackers. I love this, Isaac. Well, how does that work?
Yeah, well, you kind of think about it, the risk reward kind of formula has always been in favor of the threat actor, right? Because you're just a sitting duck there as an enterprise, and they have all the resources, time, and energy to go figure out a way to break into your environment. And once they're doing that, they're just trying to find the caches of data that you have within the environment, exfil those out, and once they have it, possession is equal to control and ownership of that data. So once they have it, they can go sell that off to the black market, and then they can encrypt it and go ransomware it back to you as well. And so again, it's completely on their in their favor to do that. That's why we have these cyber criminal gangs and everything else. It's very lucrative for them to do that.
Right.
Well, if we take this different approach here and we add that fourth wave of security onto this whole kind of equation of, device, perimeter, identity, and then of course the data. Well, think about how that changes the risk reward formula against the threat actors. So now they spent all this time, energy, and resources to go do the recon, they go do the infiltration, and then they go try to do the exfil, and they break into your vaults. And kind of, I want to use that vault kind of analogy here a little bit more, where it's like you break in, you're able to scan in, you got the credentials, you scan into the vault, and now you're expecting bags of money just to sit
Right.
there and be able to take them out. Well, now when you go look at that, you open a bag of money and every single bill in there is also in a vault
Right.
itself.
Oops.
And now you're like, oh, great. Now I got to go crack into every single vault. And I got to see, well, which file or which one of these is more valuable than not. It could be just a bunch of bills within a bunch of small vaults, but is that a $1 bill or is that 1,000 or a $100 bill? So you can get thousands of dollars, in ones or hundreds. And so now that shifts it completely. And then if they try to exfil it, well, guess what? We have encryption by default with Seclore, so it's automatically encrypted, so they can't go resell it on the black market as well.
Wow.
And if you do get some data that is exfilled, that's not a material event. That's encrypted. That is not that is exfilled. It's not a material event as well. So that's a whole other side of things where it helps you from an economic perspective as an enterprise. So the whole point of that is that we just kind of shift that whole equation against them now. So it's not just this easy snatch and grab kind of thing. Now it kind of extends the resources and the time they need to be able to do that, and then understand the value of each one of those pieces of data. Because once they take the cash, they go scan it. They'll scan it all and say, "Oh, these are all credit card numbers. Oh, these are social security numbers. These are XYZ." Well, now they
Right.
have to break in. It's like, well, is that the social security number file, or are these the social security number files, or what do we've got to do here? So
Right.
we completely help flip that against them.
Yeah, I mean, you make it significantly more difficult for them to do their jobs. And because it's got this little beacon that it flashes when something's open, you're also on to where they are now. So you know where they are. I mean, you look at these smash and grabs that have been happening in California and some other places with diamonds and jewelry and very expensive stuff. If there were a little IoT beacon inside of those diamonds, like ding, ding, here I am. Like the cops would just show up. Hey, we know you're inside. We know you've got these diamonds. I mean, that's wonderful because I'll throw it back over to Lucky. I think a lot of people don't realize how big and how industrious the bad guys have become these days. I mean, it is a whole industry out there that can focus a lot of attention to take someone down. And they did it for Colonial Pipeline. They've done it for a lot of other big hacks. I mean, I think the Target one, if I recall correctly, went through the HVAC. So it went through an IoT device. And that's the thing is you have to be worried about every single thing. If you're a big company, your perimeter is incredibly active. There are bots hitting you all the time. There are people hitting you all the time. There are people on the inside, outside. You have to go beyond just the basic perimeter. And when you go all the way down to the data level, I think that's about as secure as you can probably get. What do you think, Lucky?
Absolutely. And since COVID, like it or not, I mean, the actual threat landscape has significantly expanded, right? Now
Wow.
people actually have the hybrid, working from home, and those sort of networks are not really, they could be sitting in a coffee shop connecting to a uh, wireless network, right? And how do you secure that? And how do you secure the data, that exists on the machine, right? And they could also be using other SaaS applications that is not sanctioned. How do you secure the data when they actually use that, right? So if it's
Mhm.
not data centric because you're securing data in its actual source, I don't know how security professionals can sleep sound at night, to be honest with you, because in this economy where everything is remote and spread out, data-centric security is a must, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I'll throw it back over. Oh, go ahead, Isaac. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was just going to say I wanted to add one interesting thing. Lucky said unsanctioned applications, and it made me think about, especially now with Gen AI and Open AI and Copilot and all these other tools that are out there. We've heard multiple stories of IP that inadvertently leaked out of an organization because they put up that information into Gen AI, and some of it has been code. I think that was Samsung that happened to them. There was some proprietary code that they had uploaded into Gen AI to kind of do some analysis on. Well, guess what? Gen AI is always looking at everything that's going on and sucking it into a general model. Now they've fixed that a little bit where you can have private models, but still that is information that's outside of your control.
Right.
And then on the inverse, you have, and I kind of classify these in my mind as kind of two different types of Gen AI. So OpenAI or ChatGPT is kind of like an input, right? You want to go input information into it. So that's an input LLM. Whereas you have Copilot, where it's just going to go crawl everything in your environment, everything in SharePoint and everything on your OneDrive. And it's just going to say, oh, hey, I found all these cool bits of insight. It does not know if it's confidential insight or if it's
Right.
just general insight.
Right.
And so if you go do a search up there, you can have passport photos pop up. You can have, employee salaries pop up, and there's no way to really control that.
Right.
However, if you have those files seclored or you're focusing on the data itself, then you can say if they try to even get uploaded, guess what ChatGPT and Copilot is going to say? I don't have access to that document. I cannot go
Interesting.
open it. And so therefore it'll skip it and keep moving on. So that's just another layer to protect you against some of these unauthorized type of applications that are out there. And I say unauthorized, I'm meaning that in a little bit of a loose way where you're saying unauthorized, that I don't want that to consume my data
Right.
overall. And if you focus on the actual files themselves, then you can prevent that overall.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. We got about 3 minutes left in this segment. I do want to understand on the recipient side. So when someone gets one of these files and they are authorized, how do you manage the transfer of that key? Is it basically some sort of a password or a key that they use? Are there two communications coming in, one with the file, one with the instructions, or how do they do it, and what do they need to have on their end in order to consume that stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's pretty straightforward, actually. So if you say you have never heard or used Seclore at all, and I send you a Seclored file, there's basically one of two ways that you can use it. Number one is when it comes in via email, you can use a website version of this or an online version of it. So you can go in and they'll have you enter in some credentials, and then you log in, and then it tells you, okay, what kind of access do you have and what kind of file level security do you have on this? What can you do with that file? And say, for example, within a Lucky's environment, I'd love to hear from him as well and how they deploy it. But you also have an agent on the machine that also does that as well, so he can open it. Now, the way that works is pretty simple. What that agent does or the web service does is it calls back to what's called a policy server. And the policy server is, I call it out of band, even though that probably doesn't make sense in this context where you kind of think about it. But it's not whether it's not inside your organization or it could be outside, it could be in the cloud. But basically, it just phone home and says, "Hey, I'm getting a logon request from Eric, and is this legitimate? Is he authorized to do this? What kind of level of access?" And then, okay, I give you once you're authenticated, you're ready to go, and you can use it from there. And then the decryption key is actually it's not stored with the file. So if somebody does get access to that file, they can't try to brute force the file and crack it open because it's not stored with
Interesting.
it. So it is separate. So then the key comes down, unlocks it, and then you can have the access to it. So
Yeah.
and yeah, I'll defer to Lucky too to show some real world examples of how they use it at Eugenus.
Yeah, I'll bring you in after the for the podcast bonus segment here, but that does make a lot of sense. I am curious to know, how complicated the console can get in terms of feeds, in terms of how many files you've got. I'm guessing you can probably assign levels of seniority or kind of absorb some of that from an LDAP or from some existing system. Because if you're using it for a lot of files and the sort of curious side of my personality would love to see just how things are used and just who actually uses information that I give them from a management perspective or even from a partner perspective and marketing perspective. That's valuable information to know. All right, I gave this to 50 people, only 5 people opened it and did something with it. Well, I know those people are going to be aware of my new policy that I just tried to get everyone to pay attention to. So it's also got a little management protocol built around it, which I think is very, very interesting. But podcast bonus segment is coming up next, folks. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, time for the podcast bonus segment. We've been talking to Isaac Roybal of Seclore and Lucky Effendy from Eugenus. And Lucky, just getting back to the intensity of your job, you want to be able to sleep at night. So I think you're able to sleep pretty well now, knowing I'd be curious to know how much time and effort does it take on the management of the console side? Because if you wind up with hundreds of employees and thousands of seclured files, that takes some time to manage and to watch. And like, how does that work? And do you have a team that does that, or how does that actually work?
It's very, very easy because the moment that somebody is forwarding anything that they shouldn't have or that didn't even know, right, the IT team will actually get an email. And coming back to Isaac is asking, how do we actually use it here at Eugenus, right? So, for example, if somebody is sending an email with an attachment and the recipient receives it, register and access it, right? And with Seclore on the web, you actually have a built-in viewer, so if that person has been given access to edit, you can just edit right in the browser itself. It's very, very easy. And it's got the watermark and whatnot. If they try to print it, take a picture of it. So that's the protection. And the other thing as well, if they try to forward it across, and you do want to give them access, it's very easy as well. So the requester will get an email as well as the IT team, so we can control what's going on. And then they can click on that email saying approve access. And that's all they need to do. It's very frictionless as far as the end user is concerned. They don't have to
Yeah.
call IT and say, I do want to give this person access. Can you do it for me? None of that happens.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. And maybe Isaac, I'll throw it back over to you. I love the watermarks too. That's very, very cool because now it's in the image. You can't tell, but even if someone took a screenshot, and I remember first noticing, I think it was on my Chase app. I was just going to take a screenshot of my Chase app, but it wouldn't let me. I was like, oh, okay. I mean, that's deep in the iOS, right? To be able to enable that kind of security that it knows once I've launched this file, no, 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 on that camera. You can't take a screenshot of it, but it's very encouraging to know that even if someone takes a picture of the screenshot and posts that online, even then you get a notice to do something, right, Isaac?
Well, what it does is it'll just literally watermark the image right when you're looking at it. And I'll give you a real world use case. EA Games is a customer of ours, and they actually use us for this specific functionality as well as some others. But one of the biggest problems they were having was game footage leaking before the game was
Oh,
completed. And so what
right.
they do is they have an army of testers out there in the world, right? So they're not all EA employees; they're third-party contractors and stuff like that. So they'll send them, the versions of the game or whatever, screenshots or artwork with the art vendors, things like that. Well, they were, getting things that were posted up on Twitter from these anonymous accounts. Well, now when you open it and you see the artwork, it will have your name and the date that is actually strewn across that. So again, if you try to take a picture, whether with your
Oh,
phone or
wow.
do a screenshot, it's on there. So if you post it, it'll say Eric Kavanaugh, this date on what is we August 20th at 2:20
Wow.
p.m. Pacific time. It'll put it up there, and you'll know exactly where the last kind of person in the chain of custody, even if they left their laptop open or their machine and walked off and somebody came and snapped it, like, you were the last person to have control of that asset.
That's so interesting. And we just got a few minutes left here. I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball over at Isaac, and then look if you want to comment on it. I've thought to myself a lot about this concern around fake news and around deep fakes and things of this nature. And I had this epiphany one day, and I realized, with digital photography and digital recordings, these devices all have their own internal mechanisms that are keeping track of where you are. A lot of times it has the GPS, so it knows where you are, it knows what time it was, all these kinds of different things. So that is one path of access to securing actual authenticity of news and information, right? So I think that's part of the magic here. And it seems to me that Seclora has an interesting role to play there because you know where someone is, if you understand what I'm saying, the taking the picture and then securing it basically is adding an extra layer to that. So I know from the metadata in my phone that it was at this location. It took that photograph. I took this recording, so that's real. And then I seclore it basically to know then who does what with it and when. To me, that's very encouraging because this threat of fake news and deep fakes and all these other things is very significant. And it's really kind of turning the whole world upside down. But what do you think about that as an interesting add-on or capability of your technology, Isaac?
Yeah, I think you're spot on directionally of where we need to go with some of these things. I think proving authenticity is really the most important thing because I think there's two kind of aspects if we pull that off or pull those apart. there's the protection, but then how do you prove the authenticity?
Right.
And let's just take this example of what we have today. I can send an encrypted file to, both you and Lucky right now, but without kind of some other rights management and data-centric security on top of that. Once you decrypt that file, it's party on. You could do whatever you want. You could modify
Right.
it. You could change it and send it on to the next person as if it came from me, right? Well, if you seclure that file, I can actually say, I know that this is the original based off of what I sent you and the access policies. And again, going to whatever you modify on the file, everything is logged and I can see exactly what changes you made on that. And
Wow.
then if you try to forward it on as well. So that's definitely a great feature request. Eric, I'll log that up and put your name next to it and
There
talk
you
to
go.
our chief product officer about how maybe we can help with that in the future.
I like it. I like it. Final thoughts from you, Lucky, or any advice you have for your colleagues or other companies besides just look into this and get it done? What do you think?
Well, two things when we for Eugenus, right? When we looked at the solution is find a company that not only wants to work with you and listen and take your feedback, right? One of the significant reason why we call Seclore is a partner to us. It's not a vendor for us. Really, we're partnering with Seclore was because back then when we did our IT strategy and we went and searched for a solution, right, including with Seclore, we stated what we wanted, right? Only Seclore, given even the size of a company, would want to listen to us and put it on the roadmap and deliver it. Right? And I think that's very important when you look at the solutions you work with companies out there. Are they just a vendor or are they a partner that is really willing to listen to you? And you heard it before, floating an idea and Isaac is taking notes of it, right? I can guarantee you that that is a discussion that they will have. And don't be surprised if in the future there's a product that's called Eric Kavanagh version 1.
That's, I like that. I like that. And it's authenticity. I'm going to align myself with authenticity. I think it's a
There
very
you go.
positive brand movement.
I
Well,
love it.
gentlemen, this has been absolutely fantastic. Look these folks up online. We'll be talking to Isaac Roybal from Seclore and Lucky Effendi from Eugenus. Thanks for your time. Send me an email if you want to be on the show, info@insideanalysis.com. We'll talk to you next time. You have been listening to Inside Analysis.